Hi everyone and welcome back. And in the last couple of videos, we have already seen the end-to-end architecture, what we are going to build, how we are going to do that authentication, and how this NextAuth can be integrated with the Next.js application, and how we can have authentication end-to-end getting ready. So now what we are going to do, we are going to just set up all these things, that how we can manage the session in the NextAuth, and that session contains the ID token and access token returned from the auth 0, because what we are doing is authentication via auth 0. So we already have some setup. Now this is just like a simple demo. This is my home page, and this is pretty much my Airbnb setup, Airbnb clone we are building. This is a whole monorepo which contains the application, packages, infra, and some common library and dependency outside. And then we have applications inside application. I have one Next.js application, airbnb.com. This application will have this NextAuth configured. You can see this is the routes, API routes, and inside lib, these are the auth 0 configurations. I mean NextAuth configurations, like, okay, I'm using auth 0 provider. So auth 0 provider detail, client ID, client secret, issuer, ID token true. These are some of the parameters I'm passing, and I'm having two callbacks, session and JWT. So these two callbacks are really very helpful to populate the access token returned by auth 0 and put that token inside a NextAuth session. So if you put the auth 0 ID token and access token in the NextAuth session, then we can access this both these properties, both these tokens, and we can actually call the external service by passing this as an authorization header. So this is pretty much looks like what we are doing in the session. In the session, we are actually putting the access token and ID token, and inside a JWT, if account exists, then we are populating the access token and ID token in the token property, token object, and same token object we are accessing inside a session callback. So this is how we are able to populate the values. I mean, I have to struggle a lot in getting at least this thing done, because there is no proper content available, how we can manage the session, how we can populate the additional attributes when you are configuring the auth 0 with the NextAuth. So this is how you will do, and these are some of the routes. This is the session route. That means, because when you are doing when you are checking the session at the client components, then it indirectly calls this get session API, and that will give you authenticated true, false, and the session object, which contains a user object and access token and all. And I have some common component, and here I have already a simple layout already created with the header, some body content, and some footer content that gives me some bit of feeling of Airbnb clone. Right, we have a new bar, and everything is wrapped inside a NextAuth provider. Sorry, so here we have a NextAuth provider, and we also have a provider.ts, which is using session provider as a outer context. You can see here we have a session provider. So how do we configure the NextAuth library with the Next.js? I mean, these are just like a basic steps. Your topmost, this is, you need to create a provider, session provider, and render the children, and this NextAuth provider which you have created, that will be wrapped inside your root component. So what do we have? Root as a layout. So inside a layout we will put the NextAuth provider. And here when you do the login, so here I'm doing a login is configured with the auth 0, and what it will do is it will take me to the NextAuth screen, sorry, auth 0 screen, and here I can just enter the login credentials, or I can log in with the Gmail. My internet issues, sometimes it was failing, but here you can see my session exists, and in the header I'm showing if I'm logged in, then show me this screen. And to check the session, I just created this additional route auth that just gives me the session object, stringified session object here, and here I can see my login information. I have access token. This is the client side session, and this is the server side session. Both type of sessions I'm printing on this page just to understand a little bit more. So client side session means when you are doing a use session, then also you get a session object in the client component. And when you do in the server side, you do get server side session, that gives you the server side session object. And here I'm just doing a stringify, json.stringify, and try to print the session object what it contains. And it contains the same name, email, image, access token, and we are populating some additional property also through this callback and session. Those are also available here, and you can see here what all properties I have inside this session token. I have my roles, I have my app metadata, auth0 metadata, and I have my user ID and access token, and all these properties are available. So this is when you do the logout, and you can just do a simple login. So this is how I did. I configured a NextAuth with auth0, and auth0 I created one application, configured that inside an auth provider with the NextAuth, and NextAuth gives you some controls. Okay, login with the auth0, login with the Google, login with the credential provider. When you click onto the login button, it will take you to the auth0 screen, and from there itself it manages the session, because it fetches the session from the auth0, whatever it is returning through the callback, and then it manages, it puts the things inside a session. We can customize the NextAuth callbacks like a JWT and a session to decide what all properties we wanted to put inside a session. So here this is the ID token, and what we will do now is, let's say we wanted to list down all the properties, Airbnb properties. So we will call the listing, that is going to call Next.js internal APIs, because these are not external. From that Next.js API, we are going to do the exeos to the proxy gateway. Proxy gateway is nothing but you can say a middleware sitting on top of these small services that will forward the call to the appropriate service. But here we are going to pass the authorization header to the proxy gateway, so that the same authorization header can be passed to the property listing service. And inside a property listing service, we already have a validation logic that will validate if your token is valid and not expired, then only I will allow you to return the response. So here auth0 is doing lots of things. Auth0 is doing your user management, role management, it is managing user metadata, app metadata, and populating those things also inside a token, because that we are customizing what we need inside our token through the auth0 hooks and actions. Okay, so it is sending the enriched token with all these properties, and NextAuth session is storing those properties, because I need those session properties in the Next.js API route. So in the Next.js API route, so I'm doing a get server side session. From the session, give me the access token. I have the token. I will do exeos.post. Okay, your property listing API. This is the authorization header. If this is a private API, or if this is a public API, then it will work like this. So this is what we have discussed, and what I'm doing here is I'm making these two, both the playlist parallel, Airbnb and Udemy. So the initial architecture of both the applications are similar, Next.js, NextAuth, and auth0. The integration for both of these is similar, so you might find some Udemy clone reference also in the architecture diagrams, but you can just skip that. You can just ignore that. It's just a name, because in both the architecture, the different is these Next.js services. Here I will have a property listing services, property booking services. In the Udemy, I will be having the course manager service, or user management service, or category manager service, or file upload service, or something like that. So here I have created a proxy service, and then I can also create another service. So this is how we can bootstrap simple services. This is a booking service. So it's an Airbnb. What do you expect from this service? From this application, I should be able to list down the properties, user can filter, I should be allow user to do the booking if that is available, I should allow user to do the payment. So property listing, booking service, payment service, file notification service, all these simple services we can just create using nest commands. So here you can see payment service, user preference service. So I'm just creating these simple skeleton folders for all these services together, and I will do pnpm install on the top. So we are already using nx to automate all those things, you can just do a build, you can just start and all these things to these Next.js services. So the important part here is how we are allowing the communication, how we are managing the session. So for your Next.js client components, the session exists with the NextAuth, and the session, the details which we are passing from your Next.js APIs to the external APIs, that session is nothing but the token which is returned by the auth0 while doing a login. So your NextAuth Next.js client side and the NextAuth session exists through the cookies, because once you do the login with the auth0, it returns a specific cookies, and that is taking care of the session between your client and your server. So here I will just try to do the login again, just to manage just to see how it works. And so sometimes it fails because of the internet, sometimes it gets timed out. I try to debug it, but if there is a network delay, then these calls will get timeout. So overall important part in this whole flow is these callbacks, session callback and JWT to callback. That is the way how we populate the additional required properties in our token. Okay, like we need to get the ID token and access token that we can use further. Okay, so here we have, I mean, this is just a code walkthrough. What we are doing here is these are the environment variables which we are populating: client ID, auth, client secret, auth0 issuer, NextAuth secret, and the NextAuth URL. Okay, so because client ID and client secret we are using with auth0 issuer, and NextAuth secret and the NextAuth URL we need for the NextAuth to function properly. Okay, and this is how we are managing the session. We are using external this auth provider strategy is still the JWT, because we at the end we are generating the token based authentication is working through the cookies between your client and your NextAuth server. Okay, and the same token based strategy we are using between your Next.js APIs and the Next.js services. Okay, so let's see what we can do in the next. Like this is just like a baseline setup with the authentication already ready. Now we need to just build the property listing services and all, and those services should start giving me the listing which I can filter on the front end, same as the Airbnb clone. And based on my choice, I can just do the booking for particular duration and do the payment. This is pretty much I will do, and some APIs where I can see my existing booking history, my current booking, and all those things, like a basic minimal Airbnb setup. You know what all required APIs we know.